Hello, and welcome to Get Good. Welcome to our Getting Started series, aimed at giving you the information you need in an easy to digest form. If you like content like this, be sure to subscribe, and if there are other topics that you'd like to see covered, let us know in the comments. Now, let's get you started with how to use a wet palette, a tool you've probably seen or heard about. Why use one? Well, while a traditional tile or plastic palette will see your paint drying quickly, a wet palette will feed the paint the water it needs to stay workable, letting you paint for longer with more control over the consistency of your paint. There are two ways to get started with a wet palette: build one yourself or buy one. Neither method is better than the other. You might start with a DIY version and then buy a commercial one later. I personally use a palette from Redgrass Games, but there are plenty of excellent tutorials for making your own. A wet palette consists of three elements: a shallow container with a lid, a sponge, and a specific type of paper, one that holds its shape while still being water permeable. With these, add water and you've got a functioning wet palette. If you're crafting your own, choose a container that's not too shallow and make sure the sponge covers the entire bottom. For the paper, both Magnus and I use Reynolds parchment paper because it's relatively cheap and does the job. You may not be able to buy Reynolds parchment paper, so you want to opt for a non-waxed baking or parchment paper that allows just the right amount of water through without disintegrating or depositing fibres into your paint. There are a number of commercially available papers, and you may wish to try and experiment with these to see if they're to your liking. Remember, paper qualities vary globally, so what works well in one country may not in another. If you need help finding a paper, put a comment below the video and we'll try to provide some guidance. When setting up your wet palette, cleanliness is crucial to prevent mold buildup. Treat it like kitchenware, washing it and drying it regularly. If your sponges look thin, consider using two on top of each other to extend the working life of your palette. Once set up, add water just enough to cover the sponges without making the paper float. If it does float initially, it's fine. It will settle once the water starts evaporating. Next, place the paper on top. It tends to curl as it absorbs moisture on one side while remaining dry on the other, so I usually press it down gently to prevent this. Once it stops curling, shake off any excess water from the back, flip it over, and then lay it back down so that both sides are evenly wet. Now, for adding paint. Lay down your paint in spaced out blobs to prevent colours from bleeding into each other. This spacing also provides ample room for mixing. Start with a consistency about that of milk, adjusting by wetting your brush in water and mixing it into the paint, ensuring that it's from a clean water source. Paint thinning is a topic we'll be covering in a future video, as it's a minefield all of its own, and don't get hung up about this idea of milk consistency. If you need to mix a new shade, simply take paint from two existing blobs, combine them and mix. To achieve thinner, more translucent layers, introduce additional water by swirling your brush in the desired area, leveraging the existing moisture from the wet palette to thin the paint. That's all you need to know to get started with your wet palette. I hope you found this useful, and as always, get painting and get good.